All right. So our functionality works. Once we scroll to the bottom of the page, we have some console log, but of course, the main goal is to fetch images once we get there, correct? And how we can do that? Well, we'll have to go back to the documentation and then remember when we're fetching for the photos, what were available params? We had page, we had per page, and we had order by. So one that I'm looking for is this page one. And by default, this is going to be one. Okay. So why don't we try this out? Where I'm going to navigate back to my app. I'm looking for the URL. And in order to add that param, I just need to go with and then the parameter name was page, like so. And then, of course, what I would want is to have some kind of value. So in this case, I'm going to go with 3. And what I'm looking for here are different images. So I can see that, yeah, I'm getting back different images, which is beautiful. So here's the plan. I would want to come up with state variable by the name of page. And by default, it's going to be 1. And then in our event listener, once we get to the bottom of the page, I will change that state value by the name of page. And not only that, I will add that page to my dependencies. So then when I'm fetching, of course, I'll be fetching with that value of the page. And we'll start simply by adding this and then page and all that into the separate variable. So I'm going to go with const and then URL page is equal. And now let's construct it. I'm going to go with and then page and then equals. And then, of course, I'll access the state variable that at the moment I don't have. But I'm going to, of course, remove my current setup. And I'm just going to say that I would want to access the URL page as well. And then, of course, we would want to set up the state value. So page and then set page, correct? And we're going to go with use state. And by default, it is going to be 1. So keep in mind, our default fetch won't change. Since by default page is number 1, so the same is over here now. So we have the URL, we just add that page, and we should still get the same default images. Now, the difference is that, of course, now when we're fetching for images, I would also want to do that when my page changes, correct? So we're going to go here to dependency list, and I'm going to say, yeah, refetch the images when my page changes. And then lastly, where we have the event listener, now once we get to this point, of course, I would want to increase the page, correct? So I'm going to say, yeah, once I get to the bottom of the document, instead of console logging, it worked. If I'm not loading, and then if inner height and scroll Y is bigger than the height of the body, minus 2 pixels, which was my preference, then of course, I'm going to go with set page, and I'm just going to use the function just because I want to. And we're going to go here with old value. So old page, and we're just going to return from this function a old page plus 1, like so. So plus 1. And then once we save, we should see something pretty cool. So I'm going to navigate to the bigger browser window. And then notice we start scrolling. And then we're loading. And then there's a gotcha. And what do you think is gotcha? Why we right now have this clicker effect? Well, if we go back, notice we have data, correct? And I just go with set photos and then pass in the data. However, I already have some images. So if my goal is to display all the images, at the moment I'm overriding. I had some initial fetch. So I fetched initially some images. And then once I get to the bottom page, I'm just changing those images. Instead, what I would want is add those images to my current array. So initially I have empty array, then I add those 10 images. And then once I scroll to the bottom, of course, I would want to add those next 10 images. That's why we'll pass in the function again. And then in the function body, what I would want is to access old photos. That is my array, of course. And then we'll set up some functionality. Now, we'll have to refactor it a little bit later because there's also going to be a query. However, for the time being, we can just go with a return and then ... and then old photos. So those are the current photos that I have in the array. And then I would also want to spread out the data. So whatever photos I'm getting. So once I save, now we shouldn't have that clicker. So notice I have all my images, my 10 images. And you know what? Let me refresh. So we start with the scratch. And then I keep on scrolling, keep on scrolling, keep on scrolling. I get here, I start loading, and then I get the images. And if I keep on scrolling, of course, I'm fetching more images. I get to the bottom, and then I fetch another set of images. And if you want to double check that, you can go to Network tab, and then you'll see all the requests that we're making. So notice we're looking for page number 1, 2, 3, and then 4. And let me just mention one more time that the reason why we added this not loading, because once I get to the bottom of the page, I don't want to send out too many requests. I still want to wait for the previous one to come back. So of course the loading needs to be false and only then generate the new one. So of course that's how we can add images with our scroll event. So once we scroll to the bottom of the page, notice we have our loading since we set up a new fetch request, and then we just get those images. So every time our page value will change, we'll trigger fetch images. And of course, the page value at that point is going to be already updated, whether that's 1, 2, 3, or whatever. And then again, we send out new fetch request. Or in this case, of course, we have a different page. Since we have a variable, and inside of this variable, we have a parameter where we have page is equal to page. And that's how we can add more images once we get to the bottom of the document.